affiliated with the Mind Foundation, with Charité Berlin, with the Central Institute of Mental Health in Mannheim, who will now present qualitative data from interviews with patients in the episode Clinical Trial. The four of them are Christopher Schmidt, Henry Harder, Luca Färber, and somewhere in this room, Hanna Dressler. If you guys could introduce yourselves a little bit where you are, and then I would like to give the word directly to you to start your presentation. Yeah?
Hello, my name is Luca Färber. I'm an ethicist and a psychologist. And for about 1.5 years now, I'm working at the Central Institute of Mental Health in Mannheim in Gerd Gründer's group. And I'm a researcher in the episode study. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Henry Harder. I'm still a master's student. Before studying psychology, I was kind of very manually working with pharmaceutical ingredients in their production as a shift worker. So I'm happy to be in this new field. And yeah, Christopher.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Christopher Schmidt and I'm also a master's student currently at the University of Trier, finishing my master's studies, and I'm very privileged to conduct these qualitative interviews with the patients from the episode study together with my colleagues. And I cannot see Hanna Dressler here. She escaped.
Hanna escaped. Is this on? Yeah, this is on. Hanna escaped, but I think we can start without her. She'll have the pleasure to introduce herself a little bit later. So, guys, I leave it to you. Yeah.
Hello. All right, thank you very much and welcome to our presentation, Spiritual and Existential Themes as Experienced by Episode Psilocybin Trial Patients. Today we want to give you examples of experiences of patients in the episode trial, and especially have a look into spiritual and existential themes and how different patients interpret different experiences differently maybe. And we are also going to investigate the concepts of Frankl and Yaden. So again, we conducted these interviews with patients from the episode trial, and you heard about this trial yesterday already. It's a German psilocybin-assisted therapy trial with 144 patients. And patients were suffering from treatment-resistant depression, and every patient at least received a one-time dose of 25 milligrams of psilocybin. We conducted qualitative interviews, especially with open questions and also questions concerning psychotherapeutic processes. You heard about those in Max Wolf talk already, psychotherapeutic mechanisms of change. But also spiritual and existential themes did come up in these interviews, and we also asked follow-up questions sometimes. And also please note that we do not intend to make any statements regarding quantitative measures. This is an exploratory investigation here. And we do not want to draw conclusions regarding specific clinical outcomes of a patient here, regarding a specific experience that might have led to a clinical outcome, although we provide the Hamilton Depression Score, but this is rather context information, and we're going to have a look at some examples here. So again, spirituality is a very broad concept, and as we heard already, definitions may vary to a large extent. And so we focused on patient reports and quotes that in that the patients themselves refer to the experience as spiritual, or some related concepts like mystical, or mention God or religious. And we also investigated quotes that refer to experience that could be measured with some instruments like the Mystical Experience Questionnaire or the 11-dimensional altered states of consciousness scale, for example, unity experience, without the patient explicitly stating that it's a spiritual experience. Okay, we start with the first part and the question, how is the occurrence or absence of spiritual experiences described and interpreted from a patient's perspective? An exploratory look into different configurations of prior attitudes and beliefs. And when you look into these experiences, we asked two questions. One being, do you have to be a spiritual person to have a spiritual experience? And there we looked at patient reports of patients who did not report a spiritual background or beliefs, or stated that they were atheist or non-spiritual. And the second question would be, does a receptiveness towards spiritual experiences necessarily result in encountering one? So we looked into the patient reports for those kind of questions. And maybe it's also good at the beginning to clarify that there were also patients without spiritual experiences and without former spiritual beliefs that still benefited or reported benefits from the treatment, but this is not the focus of this presentation today. So we start with the first patient example, and this patient reported alleviations of symptoms for a period of time after 2 weeks after the dosing sessions, but then he reported also that symptoms were coming back again. And referring to the dosing session, he reported, I felt very much at the center of what was happening, and in the preparatory talks or in what I had read beforehand, the word great connectedness or something like that was used, which could be applied. To the question if he developed any positive use to him or the world, he reported, the world is still the same as before and I am also the same as before. And to a question regarding the integration process, still referring to his experiences, he reported, yes, well, I mean, what you experienced there is, I used to work in a clinical environment, so what you can play on a person's sensory organs when you inject them with something, I think I'm relatively familiar with that. So note that this patient also had a very much biological understandings of the mechanisms of action of psilocybin, and one could assume here that he did not attribute a lot of meaning to this experience. Maybe a different example of patient, and this patient described feelings of heightened connectedness to the world around him prior to the therapy trial. Again, experience that could be interpreted as spiritually meaningful by some people. And to the question you said you were experiences disconnection, did it occur in the therapy as well? He replied, yes, a little bit in this positive vision that I spoke about, where I was in this kind of womb as a fetus and surrounded by nature. I also have this experience when I'm alone by the sea. Well, not always, but I can then have that. I practically experience myself as a small part of the whole world, as part of the ecosphere. When considering the patient's own take on these experiences, it would not be considered spiritual, although they would maybe even score on some subscales of some psychometric instruments, as he stated. And then people often asked whether it was a religious experience. Because I had already come to an end with religion when I was a teenager, it was not a religious experience for me, but it can certainly for people for whom the spiritual has a reality. So for me, practically from a philosophical, scientific point of view, it has no reality, nor do I see a metaphysical spiritual level, but for people who don't reject it for logical reasons, it can certainly be a positive experience in that regard. So here we see the interpretation of the participant again. And I think one could assume that his background plays a role for him. As he stated, it was not a religious experience for me as I come to a religion, to an end with religion. Yeah, I think so. Okay. But we also see reports from patients for whom these experiences maybe have triggered a change in their approach to spirituality. Some examples we see now. And to the question, did your understanding of your life change? He replied, a small part, I would say. Before I was completely scientifically rational and well, not religious anyway. But to the question if this had an impact in everyday life, or maybe one before, he also stated that in the dosing session, that it was somehow clear that everything, well, is more or less directed, and that in some form one would still exist independently of one's body, and that not everything was somehow makes one is just a neuron storm. Well, I haven't completely discarded that. I say that is at least a fraction of it left, and maybe a little bit, well, not hope, but something along those lines that maybe you will get into the state when you're no longer alive at some point. So maybe we can see a change here. But to the question if this had an impact in everyday life, he responded, so interesting, oops. In everyday life, actually no influence, no, but maybe also quite good, because if I think that's what's waiting for me when I leave this place, maybe that's not the right approach either. Yes, so interestingly, I think we see a new, maybe a little bit a new sense for spirituality, so to speak, but no reported meaning, at least in his everyday life. But we also have seen and interviewed patients who report that their new feelings towards spirituality became a resource and are connected to better life quality and alleviation of depressive symptoms, as this patient here. And she reported meeting a universal force somehow. And yes, I think it also gives me security somehow. Yes, also gives me security. And I listened to a lot of music afterwards to connect with it again and again. She also reports changes. I do believe that I'm perhaps more open, so I have a bit more of connection to the cosmos, so to speak, somehow like this, what I mean by the mystical somehow. I had that, so I was just never particularly spiritual, and I think that's already now a bit more. And to the question if she could report more details, she reported, yes, it's not that I do anything, but I already have the feeling more. I somehow have the feeling that there could be more, and that there is a force that somehow also guides you. Or maybe that also protects you or something, so it's also a kind of more basic trust. And she also elaborated in the interview that this basic trust resulting from this experience was helping her to confront her problems connected to her depression, and that was a good thing. And close this part of this presentation with another example of somebody for whom this reported new sense of spirituality became a resource. And that was an extreme experience and went so far that I suddenly had the feeling that everything is one, and I could fully understand that. And I came into this study as someone who is clearly an atheist and has nothing to do with spirituality and such things whatsoever, absolutely nothing. And to suddenly be confronted with such topics so strongly that it is part of one's own identity, very much part of it, was very difficult for me to integrate. And the following statement refers to a period after the dosing session. I felt connected to my soul, I would say. During the second experience, I was able to feel that I am more than my body, that we already know from research that this ego is constructed ego, that is coupled together in the brain, and that is also the reason for all the problems. And once this ego has been pushed aside a bit, then you realize that there's so much more behind it, and I identified with it so much that I felt very free and somehow also responsible over the next few weeks. So what can we maybe take away from this? As we see very different interpretations of those experiences. Maybe the background plays a role in some patient in interpretation of some experiences, but also some people seem to experience or interpret those experiences in a way different to their former beliefs, and some belief changes seem to occur. And also we see some people for whom those spiritual experiences became a resource, and also in their view connected to some alleviation of symptoms. And I now hand it over to Hannah Dressler.
Hello, my name is Hannah Dressler. It seems that I have just missed my own introduction when I was grabbing a glass of water outside. I apologize for that. So I am a psychologist. I'm currently conducting qualitative interviews as well with my 3 colleagues. I'm also in training to become a psychodynamic psychotherapist, and I'm very happy to be here today. Today, I would like to present some statements from patients that reported having a prior background in spirituality or religion, as opposed to the examples that Christopher Schmidt just presented that reported no such prior connection. So first, I would like to present a male patient that described having benefited enormously from the treatment, being symptom-free for the first time in 25 years. He stated that he was raised Catholic in a small town and that he had a lot of respect towards these psychedelic substances and that he feared that this day would be one of the worst days of his life. He also stated that he had some prior meditation experience, a very diverse interest in religions, philosophies, schools of thought, and already expected that a mystical experience may occur. During the substance session, the patient describes traveling back into his childhood, being able to relive a lot of scenes growing up, facing a lot of negative emotions, and he described the whole journey as very challenging and tiring. He also describes having had an experience with God during the first dosing session, and in particular, he stated, "I also thought maybe at some point there will be a mystical experience. Maybe I'll see God or Buddha or whoever. I actually had that at one point. I had the feeling that there were a lot of lights revolving around me in the sky, and there was a light, a bright light that looked like a tunnel, a pipe, a line going through the sky. And behind it was a bright light, and I knew there is God. And I also knew God is female at that moment. That was also completely clear to me." When we asked him if the treatment changed the way he understands life now, he responded, "I've always been very interested in different philosophies, religions, schools of thought, and I think I've been looking for a long time for a model that somehow suits me. And in hindsight, I think I was subconsciously searching for a model that somehow makes sense to me, that suits me. I still find that religion is exciting, but now I find it more intellectually exciting. But I no longer have the feeling that I'm somehow comparing it with my own living environment. So I really feel like I found my way now. As I said, without putting this path into words in any way, I try to make the whole thing more tangible for me, to describe it for myself, and that doesn't work. But I feel like I've got my way now." I now want to present another example of a female patient that we interviewed with a prior interest in meditation, in particular Buddhist Vipassana meditation. She always wanted to try, but she was afraid that she would not be able to handle sitting still for that many hours. And that is why she used the first session, which she believed to have been a placebo, as an opportunity to practice 6 hours of meditation. So she reported the following about the second dosing session, which would have been a high dose then. Yes, so in the substance session, there was all the love in the world, and I was really able to accept everything that is. And I think that's what you're talking about in the enlightened state. When you're enlightened, just being in peace with yourself and with others. She also described the experience as incredibly good, incredibly inspiring and unbelievable. For me, such experiences just show the beauty of life or of existence or the meaning of existence in general. We also asked her if anything had changed in her life due to our treatment. And she responded, "Well, as I said, That was like a catalyst for me back then. A lot has changed for me, and I've also seen, yes, that meditations, which I've always tried in vain, I have now done Vipassana. In retrospect, I only lasted for a short time, twice an hour a day, but I just implemented it differently now. So I think the experiences I had in the substance session mean that one can also have other perspectives, this comfort, love for myself and for the others, this universal love. It's such a strong experience that you, by the way, I also experienced that during the Vipassana meditation. Basically, that's what you experience when you're at peace, and that was unbelievable. This patient also mentioned that after our study, she did a training to become a yoga teacher, and she chose teachers that were also engaging with the spiritual and not only the physical aspects of yoga. So now I presented 2 cases of patients with a pre-existing interest or background in spiritual themes, but does a spiritual background necessarily result in encountering one during the dosing? So I would now like to present a female patient that we interviewed. She dropped out after the first dosing, so that means she never completed her second dosing or any further integration sessions. She reported that she came with very high hopes and expectations, and that in particular, she hoped to have a spiritual experience or an experience with God. However, the dosing was experienced as very cold and lonely. When we asked her what exactly she expected from the dosing, she responded, well, taking another look at a possible relief. So I've had some drug experience in my life. I never did it for the sake of convenience, but for spiritual or ritual reasons. And I have had experiences of God in my life that have deeply moved and touched me at times. And that's what I was hoping for, something that brings me positively over the next time. So we asked her with which other substances she has had these experiences with, and she replied that she had never tried psychedelics but smoked hash, and that she felt like in a spiritual heaven when she was smoking. And she also described that she was very busy during the dosing, so busy that she didn't want to talk to the therapists, but now she's unable to remember what exactly she was being busy with. She further stated, if this had been outside the study, I would have said, damn, a stupid trip. But because I had so much hope and thought, wow, maybe it could be a way to deal with depression differently. It was 2, 3 times as bad. That was a strange situation, experiencing something bad while expecting something good and then saying, I'm quitting the study. So considering the cases that Christopher and I just presented, we conclude that sometimes people with no background in spirituality can experience such qualities and that their interpretations can be very diverse. But we do have some open questions as well that interests us. For example, how should we deal with patients who begin treatment with high hopes regarding the occurrence of spiritual experience or very specific expectations, which may be particularly important considering what is presented in the media as well? Do we need more research into prior belief and expectations? And maybe the term spiritual is so broad that it allows different interpretations by different people. That was my input for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. This takes us into the next presentation by Henry and Luca. And just in the meantime, now the microphone is on. Just in the meantime, I wanted to check in with the audience. Are there any questions regarding understanding, or did you have a more technical question towards the presentation? We'll have time for discussion afterwards. Good. Then I think we can move right on.
All right, I'm happy to be here to talk about this because it means a lot to me. Aside from looking into the potential spiritual experiences, we also wanted to take a look into existential themes, such as described by Viktor Frankl and Irvin Yalom. And yeah, so we looked into the occurrence and the nature of these experiences. And that was guided by this question for Viktor Frankl: do patients address meaning-related aspects as described by Viktor Frankl? First, of what are we talking here? So Viktor Frankl's logotherapy and existential analysis is a meaning-centered approach to psychotherapy and counseling. Frankl is best known for his perennial, we could say, bestseller, in which he depicts his survival of the Holocaust and outlines his therapeutic approach. Let me now present two central concepts that we, by which guidance we explored and categorized these interviews. The first one of these concepts refers to meaning in life. Meaning in life means so much as in logotherapy, the meaning is not constructed by the individual. It is also not a mere perception, but rather meaning is independent of us. So meaning exists all around us. And what does this mean? This concept posits that life holds opportunities to discover meaning. And this can be discovered under all circumstances of life. And this can also mean that different moments of life could have different meanings, and also for different people. But first, these meaning opportunities must be perceived and then realized, which we as humans are always free to do, but for which we are also responsible. Yet where to look, where to find these opportunities of meaning? Frankl posits that these meaning potentials, these meaning opportunities can be realized through creative, experiential, and attitudinal values. Regarding creative values, Frankl wrote, everyone has his own specific vocation or mission in life to carry out. Well, this could be, for example, a profession or an artistic endeavor that we pursue. Gotta be frank and honest. For me personally, being here with you, it is really something special for me. It is a way of me discovering a way into curiosity and inquiry about the human nature after quite some period of disorientation and quite a few dead ends. But also meaning could be found through experiential values, such as in experiences in life, such as in loving another person, or by experiencing nature or art. Related to attitudinal values, and considering Frankl's Holocaust survival, Frankl is known for what he understood as a deeply human defiance in the face of inevitable suffering. Or let's hear it in the words of Frankl: everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. The second concept relates to the individual human being. It posits that each and one of us possesses a will to meaning. And according to Frankl, this will to meaning is the primary motivational force. Simply said, at the core of what it means to be human lies the search for meaning. If we cannot fulfill our meaning opportunities, we may experience frustration, meaninglessness, and emptiness. Experiences that may further develop into illness. Now let's turn our attention to some exemplary statements where we see some resemblance with Frankl's ideas. The following two interview participants described how they experienced aspects of meaning seeking during their participation in the study. After the 6-week mark, after about the second session, I noticed that I somehow lacked a sense of meaning, that I just didn't see any meaning in it at all. I had even less of a meaning to what I had before, and I asked myself what my meaning in life was. And even if someone had told me, or I had read something like, you have to give life a meaning yourself, I didn't feel that at all. Another participant said, time and again, the desire to do something meaningful with my life came up. Another interview participant expressed how the search for meaning has often been with her during her depression, and then how to be confronted with a beautiful experience. I was overwhelmed by how beautiful this music was and what I was seeing, because I had very strong visual effects. I think it had something in the background that accompanied me a lot and that also very often shaped my depression or shapes it. This feeling of searching for meaning, like, is that all there is in life and isn't there maybe more behind it? And I think that was a feeling because of that. Or maybe there is more. Music alone can be so incredibly beautiful. A beautiful experience that the participant describes as potentially meaningful, indicating that there may be something more to life. With respect to meaning in life and how one participant expressed how she understood this psilocybin experience as an opportunity to peer into another world and how it is possible to discover meaning there. I think with psilocybin, you can briefly, how should I say it now? It's like opening a window for me, like opening a door and then seeing, oh, there is another world. And if you stay with it, there is meaning, or I discovered the meaning. And I knew, okay, I have a goal, and what I'm experiencing here now, it's not the whole truth. It's not just that, it's much more. And I saw it, felt it, and feeling it was the best thing. When asked what a specific another scene during her psilocybin experience felt like, the same participant replied, it was incredibly good, incredibly exhilarating. Well, for me, such experiences show the beauty of life or existence, or in general, the meaning of existence. Here we see some correspondence with what Frankl referred to as the realization of meaning through experiential values, through experience. However, it is surely well worth mentioning here that Frankl himself was rather critical of meanings that could be derived from a psychedelic experience. During his time at Harvard, he was witnessing firsthand the, we could say, cultural disturbances during that time. And he was kind of referring to these kind of experiences as inherently subjective, potentially bypassing the true potential of meaning that life could have in store. And with that, a curious remark, I would hand over to my colleague, Luca.
Hello again. So, while Henry was working with the ideas of Viktor Frankl, I focused on a different existential approach and dealt with the question whether participants engaged with the four ultimate concerns as defined by Erwin D. Yalom. To answer this question, I first of all had to engage myself with Yalom's existential psychotherapy. The starting point of his approach is the idea that human existence has certain intrinsic, inescapable properties. And if we as humans are confronted with these, this can lead to existential conflicts and even psychopathology. For Yalom, there are four of these properties which are the most important, and those are ones we already talked about today, namely death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness. What I did now was to read the interview transcripts, looking for statements that I could connect to those four ultimate concerns, and spoiler alert, I indeed found multiple patients who seemed to engage with one or even more of those ultimate concerns during their treatment processes. What I'd like to do now is to share with you one of the participant statements for each of those four concerns. So let's start with the first ultimate concern, death. Death is an inevitable part of life, and according to Yalom, we typically respond to that with strong anxiety. The existential conflict now arises from our wish, or from our awareness, not our wish, from our awareness of death and our wish that we want to live on, we want to continue to be. The quote I'd like to share with you is the following. I was lying towards the window and there was a vase with 3 flowers. I thought, oh, they really could have given the flowers fresh water. One of them is hanging down. It is not even in the water anymore. You have to give it water. Then the psilocybin started to take effect. And then I realized, yes, that one flower is withering, but that's just as it should be. In line with the music, I somehow saw how everything ages. Then I also saw that my arm was there, and even though there were wrinkles and some kind of spots on my arm, I thought, it's all just fine. It's all just fine. Everything falls into place. The way I see it, this person describes coming in touch with the ultimate concern of death by looking at this one dying flower. And from there, she somehow seems to generalize this aging process onto everything that ages. As she says, I somehow saw how everything ages. And furthermore, she then seems to make a connection to herself as an aging and as a mortal being, as she sees those wrinkles and spots on her arm. But notably, instead of responding to that with anxiety, she seems to sort of adopt a position of acceptance towards her own aging process. As she says, it's all just fine, everything falls into place. Moving on to the second ultimate concern, freedom. According to Yalom, the individual is entirely free. And what he means by that is that the individual is entirely responsible for and author of their own life. The existential conflict now arises from our awareness of this existential freedom that clashes with our wish for external ground and orientation. The other way around, or what is important to know, is that for Yalom, all those things that could give us, from an external perspective, give us ground and orientation are constructions. So things as traditions, cultural norms, religion, all those things are, or ethics, all those things are constructions. And if we realize that, we are confronted with this kind of existential freedom and the necessity to take responsibility for our lives and actions. The quote I'd like to share with you is this one. I just understood that I'm completely free to do what I want in every way and that I'm only limiting myself. And that's really scary at first. I don't have to do anything. I wouldn't even have to go to work tomorrow if I didn't want to. These are all barriers I make in my head. I cannot shift the responsibility to others either. It's me. I decide, and I also must bear the consequences. If you know that, you are calmer, and you can also stand by your decisions. Here we seem to have a person who really engages with the kind of existential freedom that Yaden is talking about. He realizes that he is indeed completely free, and that even having to go to, or believing that having to go to work tomorrow is a construction he makes himself inside his head. And then he also comes to this aspect of responsibility as he realizes that he cannot shift the responsibility for his own actions and his own life to others. Notably, this feeling of calm, or as he states, he feels calmer and he can stand by his decisions. That's not his first reaction to this realization of freedom. His first reaction is actually that it scares him when he's confronted with that kind of freedom. The third existential concern is isolation. According to Yaden, there's an unbridgeable isolation of the individual from others and from the world. And that's also something that we touched today already in the panel. The idea is that if you become an individual, you sort of have to separate yourself. You have to detach yourself as a subject from the rest of the world to be an individual. And the existential conflict now arises from the awareness of our existential isolation and our wish to be in contact with others, with the world, with nature, and our wish to be part of a larger whole. That's the quote I'd like to share with you. I was more or less locked up in my own brain the whole time, which was a kind of black sphere. It was a very unsettling experience, very isolated, very alone. Those are feelings that I know, but not in a way that it feels so real that you feel locked up. Like I said, I was in a black sphere where you're stuck in and you cannot get out and you have no contact with the outside. This patient vividly describes the feeling of existential isolation. He is isolated, he is alone, he has no contact to the outer world whatsoever. We did also have patients who described in the qualitative interviews this feeling of unity, of connectedness to others, of connectedness to the world, and were very blessed by that, or reported this being a very blissful feeling. But for this person here, that was not the case. He did not experience anything of that. He just stuck in isolation his whole psychedelic experience. Lastly, the ultimate concern number 4, meaninglessness. According to Yaden, there exists no meaning in the universe whatsoever, independent of ourselves. And that, of course, is a very different perspective than Henry showed us, which Frankl has. Frankl says there is meaning independent of us in the universe, in the world. And for Yaden, it's the exact opposite. If we do not create meaning, then there is just no meaning in the world. And the existential conflict now arises from our awareness or realization of this universal meaninglessness and the fact that humans typically are meaning-seeking creatures. That's the final quote. In the time after the substance session, I had the feeling that I'm actually fine the way I am. That I don't do what others expect of me, but what I want to do, what I have to do, where I have the feeling that this is my meaning. My meaning is not 100% there yet, but still it's a good feeling. Here I just want to underline 2 aspects. Firstly, this person explicitly speaks of his own meaning, which is independent of others. And secondly, his last sentence, at least from my point of view, can be interpreted as a hint that meaning is an active construction. His meaning is not 100% there yet, so he still might be in the very construction process. To conclude, the patients in the episode study do describe engaging with existential problems and concepts, which we demonstrated with the help of Viktor Frankl's ideas and Irvin Yalom's ideas. And if indeed psychedelics are especially able to activate existential as well as spiritual issues, then according to Politsky and colleagues, addressing these issues intentionally and systematically might be important for the future research on and development of psychedelic-assisted therapy. Thank you all for now. That's everything from me.
Thank you so much, Luca and Henrik, for the second input. As we see, this surely raises a lot of questions concerning epistemology. How do we leverage these experiences for therapeutic use? And as we see, there's also quite a degree of ambiguity. For some patients, it just doesn't help to have these mystical experiences. Now, can we use the remaining time we have, 6-7 minutes, for questions? Do we have questions here in the audience towards our speakers? Yes, please. Guys, do you want to come here to the front?
The question is about the experience of the patient who encountered this feeling of isolation. And I saw he didn't get so much better from the treatment. And is it possible to do some integration about this? Or should the patient who encounters such a fear of isolation, should he do another session where he can find a way out of that?
My opinion would be that ideally you first try to integrate what he experienced. I think from Yalam's point of view, this would be an opportunity for growth. So if you realize, okay, I experienced isolation the whole time, I was locked in my own brain, I did not have any contact to others, what does that mean? And maybe there would be an opportunity to take that experience and sort of try to make it meaningful and see, okay, I was confronted with that, and apparently that is an anxiety that I have to be isolated. This is something that maybe even the human condition is a part of the human condition. And how can I find ways not to completely get rid of it, but to deal with it, or to find connections, to get, for example, in touch with nature, we talked about that today already, or with others in a way that sort of, makes this feeling less intense. And then, of course, one could think about another dosing session, but I think, first of all, try to work with what you experienced.
Further comments or questions?
My question is about the Hamilton scale, actually, because I was struck by the fact that the last case presented, the patient who found the meaning, I don't know, maybe it was just a coincidence, but it was the case that improved the most compared to the other patients. So my question is if you could comment on that somehow, or do you plan to analyze such data, such relationships in the study?
Actually, I do know the patient a bit, at least. I'm not his therapist because I'm not a therapist in the study, but I had some contact with him. And the last time I talked to him was at an in-person integration meeting where he described that he still is in the process of finding meaning and of making sense of what he experienced, but still, so he is, until this day, not at 100% yet, still. But he still seems to be profiting from it and benefiting from it. And then the second part of your question, at least I would be interested in that. That's why I talked about it. I think these existential topics are something that can be very helpful, or engaging with them can be very helpful for problems that can be part of a depression. Yeah.
Now there's a chance for another question. Armin, did I see a hand there? No? I thought so. Okay, Gerd, please.
Just a comment to the last question. We have a meaning in life scale and we have the Hamilton. So we definitely will correlate these two, but we cannot do that right now.
Okay, one more question, and then we're almost perfectly on time.
I will try to express myself in English, but I'm concerned about the survey of, I don't remember your name, about with patient with Christopher, with resistant depression and the spiritual orientation. If the belief is that there is no spirituality, and that person has tried several treatments and no one worked, none of them worked. And he felt, I think it was your third patient, and he felt a really nice experience, but then the fear of this one doesn't work either, because it wasn't a spiritual experience. Maybe my question is, if we orient, if we focus the integration or the talk on spirituality, he will get more depressed or more disanimated. And if we orient the integration on the experience and on the benefit of the experience without talking about spirituality, then maybe it could be a lift up. I don't know if I can express myself.
Yeah, I try. Yeah, I think that raises the important question on the psychotherapeutic processes, and also about also this concept of spirituality. Is also the patient have different, probably different interpretation of this terminology, and I don't know. Do you want to add something? I don't have a clear answer to the question, maybe.
I mean, addressing it at all, I think it is a very important thing. On the one hand, I think it is a very helpful metaphor of letting the patient, letting the client drive the bus. And on the other hand, sometimes the patient may need help driving the bus, not in a way of imposing on the patient's value and belief systems, but still addressing it is the first step in culturally competent addressing the situation of the certain patient. So does this help anything at all? Yeah.
And I think it's very important as well to establish a framework, because those questions or those topics, they're not just going to go away if we don't address them. It just means that the patient is left alone with them. So it's very crucial to establish a framework that is very open. But on the other hand, I think we also shouldn't advocate that these experiences are going to happen, because as seen in my case, this can lead to a lot of frustration or disappointment if that is not the case.
Thank you, Anna. That's an important remark. And we should continue to try make sense out of the ineffable. And I hope that the symposium this morning has maybe made a few steps into ventured into some areas that are very hard to explain, maybe even harder to grasp, and yet harder to leverage in psychedelic therapies. I'm very glad that you've been here with us this morning, and we are now moving into the lunch break. I hope you found this meaningful. If you have further questions, I would like you to write them down on a piece of paper. And I think in your conference bags, there should also be notebooks and pens. that you can plant and grow something actually. Yes, you have them. And we have these boxes here that are also, yes, I see some questions, that are also placed at the Mind Info booth in every room. Today, this afternoon, we'll address them. There will be experts, or at least very opinionated people that will say something to them. Have a nice lunch break and see you later. Presenters.